This is the Bob Cordaro Show on TV.
They fought for us, now he'll fight for you. The pursuit of justice and liberty. It's the Bob Cordaro Show on TV.
Rebecca Martino is the owner of Stately Pet Supply, a unique pet store experience in Clark Summit. Rebecca is also a vocal advocate for local business and buying local.
Well, we get to, again this month, be with Rebecca Martino of Stately Pet Supply. And she gives us all the inside tips. We're going to go up to her store in future episodes, but she's got a little more wisdom to impart to us. Rebecca, good to see you again, as always. Thanks. So tell me, you said there's a little dirty secret in pet food that you wanted to talk about.
There are quite a few. We can make an entire show out of just me listing the dirty little secrets in pet food. So it's a very, unfortunately, what the consumer doesn't know won't hurt them. So I ask customers,
it'll hurt their pet.
Yes, eventually. The dangerous thing is that, yes, it can, but it's not an instant thing necessarily. If you're feeding a food, how do you know that, all right, you have a young, healthy puppy. How do you know that in 6-7 years, there's not an incredible amount of, let's say, copper in the food, that at 7-8, they're going to be in liver failure? And that's just not even the tip of the iceberg. But I have to say, I have so much fun doing these little segments. Every time I leave, I start thinking, okay, what am I going to do next time? You know, I don't want to be boring and lose people.
But this is a big one.
It is.
Because people are buying, and I admit, I bought for my English Bulldogs, I bought on price almost.
Oh, right.
I'd see a thing. I said, the dog doesn't taste, a bulldog.
He eats it. It's fine.
He doesn't taste his food anyway. And
they don't. They vacuum it. Yeah.
But this is a big deal.
It is. So that's where I like to come in. And I'll say that where I got my idea for what we could talk about today is I was very nicely tagged in a Facebook post to chime in about how to help someone that was having a diet issue with their pet. And the tag mentioned, hey, they're great up there for when you need specialty food.
Stately Pet Supply.
Correct. So thank you. But what a light bulb went off for me that, wait a minute, I don't think of our store as something that carries specialty food. I just like to say we carry the stuff that's just not crap. Yeah. If I can say that. So I can't put that on a billboard.
We talked about it. You almost curated your products, particularly your
I
pet food.
hand select what comes in. I've dismissed brands that have had nasty recalls. I've dismissed brands that have not complied with FDA letters to clean this or this up. And that's the behind the scenes stuff that I do. So when you're in the store and you're picking a new food, I say, picture this as a brown paper bag. Stop looking at the Little House on the Prairie, beautiful pictures. And it is a very generic set of information that we see on packages. It really doesn't say very much. Everyone says they're the best, and everyone says, oh, your dog's a wolf, and your dog's not a wolf. But one thing I like to say a lot is that when I hear people are afraid, make sure it's not made in China. I say, I've actually never seen a food. Treats, yes. Foods made in China. Don't waste your time looking for them. I don't think they exist. However, what does exist is Chinese sourcing. So how much stuff just in the room we're in was maybe made in China that you cannot avoid? It's not made anywhere else in the world. But they're just not known for their quality. They're known for doing things faster and cheaper. And that gets into pet food too. So you can say, for example, you get salmon from China. It is sprayed with any kind of preservative they can think of. It gets to our shores. Vitamin E, which is a natural preservative, makes contact with it. And our labels now allow it to be called naturally preserved. But it's not the whole story. That's what I like to say. So I'll sell you a bag of food that's chicken and rice for $45. And it should not be over 100. That's bells and whistles. You don't need blueberries raining from the sky and venison from Jupiter. And that's all marketing. So Chinese sourcing is very, very under talked about. And I'll say this. A lot of things are not available in the US, and it's almost impossible to get a 100% USA sourced pet food. You have to go somewhere else. So where do you not want to go? China, right? Most vitamins and minerals for pet food are sourced from China at minimum.
So the key is, to me, here's my takeaway. Go to Stately
Pet Supply. That's right. That's it.
And ask.
Yeah.
And say, give me the best food for my dog. Maybe even bring the dog in. Maybe even bring the cat in.
Yep.
Let them visit.
Tell me what you want. Tell me what you don't want to spend any more than this. I probably have something that fits it. If your dog doesn't like it, bring it back. We swap it out. We donate it. I'm credited. I don't even lose out. We'll get you something else instead.
That's why we go to Stately Pet Supply.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Road Scholar Transport is proud to sponsor Camp Freedom, where veterans go to heal and find peace. Go to roadscholar.com/Camp Freedom today and tell our veterans what their sacrifice means to you. Your message may be chosen for display on Road Scholar Transport trailers to be seen by thousands of people. Show our veterans how much you care. Send them your message today. Road Scholar Transport, a higher standard.
Great good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Bob Cordaro Show on TV. Today, we've got a fascinating Power Brunch Player of the Week, Matt Birkbeck. I've read his books going back to The Quiet Dawn. He's got other books as well. But what is all the rage now is the book we have in front of us, The Life We Chose. And it's a story that revolves around Russell Bufalino, former mafia boss, and Billy D'Elia, former mafia boss here in northeastern Pennsylvania, and quite far beyond. And we're going to talk to Matt today about how he came to the subject, how he wrote the book, maybe even a little bit of inside baseball about how he writes and how he conceives and so forth. But be that as it may, we're going to talk to Matt Birkbeck, and he is a great writer. I, along with so many of you, have read this book, and I urge you, if you didn't, get it. It reads like a novel, as does The Quiet Dawn. I mean, just great writing. And Matt Birkbeck, with that glowing
thank you
tribute, welcome to this program.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
How did you get to the subject? You were talking about, because your background, you were in radio, you news, you've always been in this milieu. And so these kinds of books are a natural stepping stone from where you were. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I did my first book 20 years ago when I was at People magazine I was writing for. And it was on this fellow named Robert Durst.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I forgot about that book.
It became
a
huge national case.
Yeah.
And I wrote the book. I covered it for People.
A billionaire real estate mogul murderer.
Yes. Only he killed more people than we even know.
Yeah.
And I wrote about it, and I had developed such really good sources with it that the book became kind of like the Bible of the Durst case over the years. So any law enforcement, filmmakers, whatever. And ultimately, he was arrested in 2015, and then he subsequently died. But that was my first book. And then I worked in newspapers.
That's a heck of a start.
It was, but then I was working in newspapers, and I was working for the Morning Call in Allentown. I was doing investigative reporting.
Yeah.
And I covered in the early 2000s the whole casino debacle, particularly here locally with Louis de Naples when he was trying to get Mount Airy and what went on behind that, which actually led to me getting to know more about the Bufalino family, and ultimately led to me doing The Quiet Dawn.
Yeah.
So I was fascinated with Russell in terms of just how big he was. I had no idea. And then I wrote A Beautiful Child. Actually wrote that way before The Quiet Dawn. But then that subsequently, along with a follow-up book I did, Finding Sharon, became a Netflix film last year, which I produced. And I actually worked on concurrently with this book, The Life We Chose.
Wow.
So in doing this one, I had never, once I did The Quiet Dawn, I was not going to do another mob book.
Yeah.
And I said that to myself. I said, that's it. And then I get an email out of the blue. It was 3 years ago that said, do you want to meet Billy D'Elia? Or you want to talk to him? And I just jumped, because I knew Billy. I didn't know him personally. I never met him. I knew of him. I covered him when he had gotten arrested. I knew he was really big in terms of being a potential witness in this whole casino thing back when, and that never happened. He never testified. I knew he was a big wheel within organized crime. I didn't know how big, but I knew he knew a lot. He knew a lot of secrets.
Yeah.
And so I just said, yeah. I said, let's meet.
And what did he say? I'm ready to spill. How does that conversation go?
Bill had never spoken to anyone. You know, as I write in the book, when he was arrested in 2006, he had all these different government agencies that wanted to talk to him because he had been with Russell for almost 30 years. And they figured since he was so close to Russell, he must know a lot, particularly about Jimmy Hoffa.
Yeah.
The whole Hoffa case had been this one big question mark for so many years. And so I knew he had never spoken. I knew he never spoke to the media. I used to speak to his attorney would call me way back when, in the mid, like 2006, 7, 8, after he had gotten arrested. But I said, can I speak to Bill? No. All right, so Bill was in prison, and he gets out of prison. Never spoken to him. He never spoke to anyone. And I said, let me go see what he's got to say. And we ended up meeting at this restaurant. I don't remember the name, but it was in Wilkes-Barre. And they had a room set aside. It was him and his son, Russell, and a friend of theirs, Dave, who was the one who actually emailed me, I found out. And there's Bill sitting there. And he's a big guy.
So are you.
He's bigger than me.
Yeah.
Billy's bigger than me. He had this fearsome reputation. I've done interviews with serial killers. I've done interviews with all kinds of people. I was a little intimidated going in to meet with Bill. I didn't know what to expect. I thought I didn't know what the motivation would be for him to finally talk. Was he upset with me for some reason? Something to do with the Quiet Dawn, or maybe some of my prior reporting. I wasn't, I even got to the restaurant and I texted my wife and I said, hey, I'm at the restaurant. Just to let you know where I was at.
I hope you know. But you should be glad to know that you weren't the only person intimidated by Billy.
No, he was a very intimidating. He was intimidating to see him in person, and but he didn't want to talk. He wanted to set the record straight on a number of different things. He had just seen The Irishman, for instance, and it outraged him in terms of a number of different things, particularly Frank Sheeran's story. Yeah, because Bill knew it. I knew, as I said earlier, I knew Billy was big within organized crime. I had no idea how big he really was until we started doing this book. Yeah. So we began, that was 3 years ago. We started talking in October of 2000, and we continued to talk for almost 2 years.
What's your method is, do you do immersive discussions and then followed by, hey, how about this, and questions? And I mean, this book, Billy D'Elia tells you something. Well, if you're going to put it under your name, it's got to be accurate to the best you can demonstrate it is. So there's a lot of back checking, a lot of fact checking to a really remarkable national story.
Yeah. I hired a research assistant to help me, a really good reporter that I had known, who helped me with a number of different things. In doing this, basically, I had to write up I changed up everything. I wanted to get a new agent. I had my attorney who had represented me in terms of book deals, because basically the stories were coming to me, so it was kind of easy. I didn't need an agent to pitch them. Yeah. But I had gotten a new literary agent. I got a new film agent. We had to do a proposal. But I need to know what Billy knew. And it was like pulling teeth in the beginning. He wanted to talk, but guys like him don't talk. Yeah. And therein lies the problem. And I had to get him to feel comfortable. It took several months to get him to really, Bill.
And he read The Quiet Dawn.
He did.
So he was familiar with your work. He was familiar with the tale you
I did a book on Sammy Davis Jr. in 2008 called Deconstructing Sammy, and he read that book in prison. So he knew my work. Yeah. He's familiar with me. He even had my newspaper articles, the ones I had written about him back then. So he was well read. He's very smart. But he was also very easy to talk to. You can see why he was very successful. He could have been successful in any line of business. Yeah. That's what he was like. That's what I would come to know. But it was difficult in the beginning because he's a guy who, in that world, you don't talk, and that's what you believe. So trying to get him past that and actually trust me with the information he was giving me. And that's when the book started to take form. That's when I saw, here's the story. Because I have a different writing style than many other writers who, it's not just mob books, it's in the nonfiction genre where they'll do all their research and they want to get every fact in the book. And I'm thinking, and it's with all my books, I'm thinking of like a 2-hour movie, so to speak. Like I have a beginning, I have a middle, and I have an end. And I want it to be, I need a really compelling intro. I want to keep their interest and then keep their interest right through as I'm telling the story. And as Billy's telling me his story, it was just a natural in terms of putting this book together.
I mean, one of the things we talked about before and on the phone was that if I asked you why something was missing, you said there was so much material, you couldn't fit it all in a book.
Yeah.
Just in keeping with what you just said.
I couldn't, because it would be kind of mundane after a while. I mean, you could only tell. I mean, Bill, I'll give him credit for this, and I always have. He owns up to what he was and what he did. And he loved it. He'll tell you flat out he loved that life.
Yeah.
But he was a gangster. And that was his life, and he has no regrets. But there's only so many stories you could tell about how many different scores or schemes or this or whatever.
Yeah.
Which made up a part of his life. I mean, he dealt with many powerful people. So I had to be somewhat judicious. And, in the 1990s, for instance, there were many stories with many celebrities that he was involved with that he got called into. Bill was the negotiator. He would get called across the country. And there were a couple of dozen stories that I had chosen from. And there's one on Tony Braxton in there. There's one on I had to use it only because some people may not remember him, but this guy Fabio.
Sure, I remember Fabio.
So the male model who ran into a jam and Billy had to deal with it. And then there was this rapper called Corrupt. And Billy basically, he had to come in and tell his then manager, I think he was at the time, Suge Knight, who most people have heard of, who's in prison now, who was with Tupac Shakur the night he died. And he was a fearsome guy himself. And Billy basically told Suge Knight, we're not taking over Corrupt. And Suge Knight said, okay, because he knew who Billy was, and he walked away, which was very rare for Suge Knight. And Billy made a lot of money on Corrupt. But you can't tell,
everything,
all those stories, because it gets kind of boring after a while.
Yeah.
You get it. I mean, after a while, after 2 or 3 years.
I'll beg to differ with you slightly, because myself and so many other people who read it were looking for more.
Yeah. Well, that's good though.
Which is what
I left you wanting more.
Yeah.
Had I given you more, and then it would have become somewhat mundane, because it's basically the same thing. It might be the names changed, but the thing, it's still the same. So, but by that time, you've already read about, a slew of names in the book. There's, Johnny Unitas, Bobby Kennedy, Jimmy Hoffa, Muhammad Ali, Larry Holmes, Donald Trump, Michael Jackson. And, those are just a few. So I think the point was made by then.
I would say so. So let's go back to how you write. You said you don't do all the research and then start writing over the top of it. You let that play out, essentially.
No, I do all the research.
What Billy said.
No, I do all the research.
Okay.
Like I taped everything.
You have these kitchen table conversations with Billy DeLea, and you're comfortable with him by now.
Yeah.
And he's obviously comfortable with you.
Yeah. Allowing
himself to be taped, among other things. Not videoed, but taped, right?
We did some video.
Some video?
Yeah.
How do those go? I mean, that just becomes comfortable banter at some point.
Yeah, we're just talking. And I wanted to talk about, we go through his life, but I also wanted to talk to him about certain events. Particularly the big events were Jimmy Hoffa, which he talked about. And he didn't really tell me, though, about this one big meeting, which is in the book, which really explains, this is right after Hoffa disappeared. It really explains who was involved in his disappearance. And that came maybe a year into it, and it just came so naturally. It caught me off guard. And then he mentioned, we were a year into it, and he mentioned Donald Trump and how he intervened in an attempt by Trump to get Michael Jackson to perform in Atlantic City. And the result of that, Trump didn't get it, but Billy became Michael Jackson's co-manager. But it just came so naturally. It was just like so matter of fact the way he told it to me. Big events, there was some things you just can't check. You're taking his word for it. But I never found him to tell me in all that time anything that I came back to haunt me or I found wasn't true. And what we could check, we did check. And I was shocked. I was shocked because his memory was that good.
Yeah.
On a number of things.
So these conversations continue. You're comfortable with the family, comfortable with the whole deal. You were talking about Pittston and how it reminds you of Brooklyn. I remember something in 1978 or 79 in U.S. News and World Report when it was a big time magazine, and it had mafia centers in the United States. And it was like New York and Philadelphia, maybe Los Angeles, I'm forgetting, but I just remember number 3 was Pittston, Pennsylvania. So it was acknowledged back then, even though the Quiet Don was exactly that. Russell Buffalino was not well known in the media and in public circles. When you look back on it, because much of the story is about Buffalino, how did he accomplish that?
He was brilliant. He was born into this life, as you'll read in the book. Very intelligent man. It was one thing that Bill said all the time was how smart he was. Yeah. But he wasn't your so-called typical mobster. He apparently was interested in a lot of different things. He read a lot of books. He was interested in music. He read Shakespeare, according to Bill. Really, really smart guy. What was also really brilliant on his part was he spent half his time in New York. And that's really where his operation was. And that's what made him so big. And Bill, and I'll never forget this, I said, Bill, was Russell ever part of the commission, the 5-member commission that ran organized crime? He said, no. He said, Russell was above the commission. And so I'm thinking, all right, so now I'm talking to the guy that Russell embraced as his son, meaning Bill. Yeah. And so I knew how powerful Russell was, and that confirmed it. And then I got to see just how powerful Bill was and how he wasn't, people know him locally. And so many people know him. When we did a book signing, we signed over 1,000 books in Wilkes-Barre. Yeah. Because so many people came to see him and had read the book. But he was big everywhere. Kansas City, Vegas, Los Angeles. He would go across country. This is local people will love this because they'll know it. They'll be so familiar to them. But it's a national story, given just how influential Bill was in.
And quietly so.
Yeah.
Just like the Quiet Don.
He learned from Russell, which is probably why it was so difficult for him to talk to me in the beginning. He wanted to talk, but it was just so hard, and he was thinking of everything that Russell taught him. Yeah. So fortunately, we got past that.
And to a tremendous degree. One of the things that I thought about the book in the couple minutes we have left in this segment, because then we'll go on to BCTV Extra. I don't know. I could almost think of a Scorsese movie with the music playing when you were doing the various settings as Billy D'Elia was meeting Russell and becoming involved in everything he was doing. You really captured the times, an era, and this area.
Yeah, I mean, when I write, I think about that. Again, I'm writing it as if it's not a screenplay. I'm writing a story and I'm writing it as accurately as I can. Yeah. But in telling it, I need to do it in a way that keeps the reader interested and involved and want to just continue and not want to put it down. And that's my goal. Hopefully it works. But in this case, I mean, it was so rich, the detail that Bill gave me. It was just so rich. It was easy to write.
Well, as they say, he's a character. Mm. You capture that and more with this book, The Life We Chose. I was sort of surprised that the title was available.
Oh, that was we
What a
actually had
tremendous title.
we had a different title, and we were looking for something different. And his daughter came up with that.
Fabulous.
And I remember she's sending it over, and I'm looking at it, I'm going, I don't know. And then I sent it off to the publisher, and they loved it. And I love it now. Now that I see it, I see the cover, everything about it I love. But that came from his daughter, Carolyn.
Well, the book's fabulous. As I've told people that ask me about it, it's one of the greatest reads you'll have. And Matt Birkbeck, we appreciate you being with us.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to our continued conversation. But The Life We Chose is the book. Matt Birkbeck is the author. Billy D'Elia and I guess Russell Buffalino are the subjects. And they're close to everybody here who knows anybody. And we appreciate you coming on the program.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Road Scholar Transport is proud to sponsor Camp Freedom, where veterans go to heal and find peace. Go to roadscholar.com/Camp Freedom today and tell our veterans what their sacrifice means to you. Your message may be chosen for display on Road Scholar Transport trailers to be seen by thousands of people. Show our veterans how much you care. Send them your message today. Road Scholar Transport, a higher standard. Road Scholar Transport is proud to sponsor Camp Freedom, where veterans go to heal and find peace. Go to roadscholar.com/Camp Freedom today and tell our veterans what their sacrifice means to you. Your message may be chosen for display on Road Scholar Transport trailers to be seen by thousands of people. Show our veterans how much you care. Send them your message today. Road Scholar Transport, a higher standard.
Continuing with Matt Birkbeck, not only just about the book with The Life We Chose, and we finished up with the title. Were you surprised that this wasn't taken?
Yeah, actually I was. I mean, I think there was some rapper once did something, I think, with that title. But yeah, no one had taken it before. It was available. And since everyone seemed to, eventually love it, it wasn't quite at first, but then we did, and it was perfect, actually, given that it is the life that Bill D'Elia chose. I'm glad it was available.
You talked about Frank Sheeran, the Hoffa murder, and in the book, you say Sheeran was just sort of rooting around for an ending and a conclusion that would sell books to make some money for his family. That was surprising to me because the Sheeran book, I Hear You Paint Houses, almost gave one of the most credible rationales, conclusions, and set of events. It ended up being in The Irishman.
Yeah. Well, The Irishman, I knew the writer, Charlie Brandt. He reached out to me in 2008 because they had optioned the book for a film way back when.
Yeah.
Only no one really believed what Sheeran was saying.
Yeah.
And so I had been given different information over the years as to whether or not there was any validity in it about him actually killing Jimmy Hoffa. And Bill said it was fiction, but he didn't just say it. He had actual documentation. He had the original versions of Sheeran's book. Him and Frank Sheeran were very, very close.
Yeah.
And when Sheeran got out of prison in 1994, I think it was, he had already started writing it. He actually asked Bill for permission to write it. And Bill said to him, don't name anyone that's still alive. Keep my name out of it, which he did.
Mm-hmm.
And do not publish this until Carrie Buffalino passes away. That he did not honor. Well, actually, he was dead by then. And so Charlie Brandt, the author, didn't honor. And Charlie Brandt was in on the meeting, as you see in the book.
Yeah.
So, I had original chapters from the book. I had a press release that Sheeran had issued. I had a letter from Hoffa's daughter that he wrote to Hoffa's daughter, and I had the response, Barbara Crancer, from 1995. And in it, in the letter, Sheeran says, I had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden he turns around in his dying days and says, oh, by the way, I'm the one that killed him. So, Bill said it was fiction.
Yeah.
And he also, the other thing that really helped Bill in terms of disproving the story was going back to when Hoffa disappeared, and this big meeting that they had in the Vesuvio a couple of days after, where it was Bill was there, and Sheeran was there with Buffalino, and Tony Provenzano and Tony Salerno from New York, and it was
Tony.
Yeah, Fat Tony Salerno, and they were the ones. Buffalino told Bill they're the ones who ordered Hoffa's murder, and Sheeran was so upset he wanted to kill them. And this meeting was being held to calm Sheeran down and to have him promise Salerno and Provenzano he wouldn't harm them. And that's what happened. And there's more in the book about that actual meeting. But I did say to Bill, I said, well, would they have done that without Buffalino knowing? They have gotten rid of Hoffa. And because Bill said that initially that he didn't think that Russell was involved, but then when he thought about it, he realized that they couldn't. And he said, yeah, he had to have known, or actually had a role in it. And my take on it was he actually had a role in it.
Yeah. And those are the areas where you'd get to, and you'd obviously get into a little bit of a wall.
In terms of the overall book, or
no,
the Hoffa thing?
Billy taking you forward in detail.
Well, as far as Hoffa, the thing about Bill that I really liked was that he only told me what he knew. He didn't want to guess. And the thing that was really interesting was that, so he was a observer in the beginning of his career with Russell for the first 10 years or so. And then he became the participant because he took over the family. He was the de facto head beginning in the late 70s. And Bill would only tell me what he knew or what he saw. He didn't want to guess. For instance, Johnny Unitas, the great legendary football quarterback, the Baltimore Colts, drives up here. I had a journalist friend, comes up from Washington a couple of years ago. He knows I'm doing the book, to give me an FBI file that I had never seen before. They were surveilling Buffalino, and the FBI guys were shocked to see Johnny Unitas coming out of a Cadillac with Maryland plates to have lunch with Russell and Billy and a couple of other guys. And I'm like, Johnny Unitas? And then they follow Unitas throughout Wilkes-Barre and Scranton, meeting with other guys.
Yeah.
And as if he's familiar with them, shaking hands, hugging them. And I said to Bill, what's this about? So Bill said to me they were trying to get him to speak at some, Pee-wee football function or something like that. And I'm thinking to myself, he's not coming up here just to speak at some Pee-wee football function. He's got to be involved in something. Bill didn't want to go that far because he really didn't know, because again, he's the underling to Buffalino, and he doesn't, in that line of work, you don't ask someone questions. Yeah. Russell tells him, and Bill says yes or no. Like, go do something. Usually it was always yes. And so he didn't know, but we did further research. I didn't include it in the book, but you do further research. You see that Johnny Unitas did get jammed up a little bit after his career with a couple of gambling situations. Yeah.
He was working for some tout at some point too. Yeah. Some betting tout.
Yeah. And also you can't meet, if you're an active player in the NFL, you cannot meet with an organized crime figure, much less the Don of Dons and Russell Buffalino. So to me, obviously there was something more going on there, but Bill, to his credit, didn't want to guess, didn't want to make anything up. He just said, look, this is what I know. We were talking to him about appearing at some kid's dinner or something. And I said, fine. And that's how it is in the book.
You always think of like the Super Bowl they lost to the Jets.
Yeah,
like
well,
that, you say, and it's wild speculation.
It is. Yeah, it is. But once you see him meet with Buffalino, you can go there privately, but you can go there and think, man, maybe. So, yeah.
Well, there's restraint on that because you didn't even infer that kind of thing. You stuck to the facts too. And
the only thing
I thought that was admirable.
We did. Yeah. I did. I didn't want to embellish it. I didn't need to embellish it, but I wouldn't anyway. I did write though that he could not be meeting with organized crime figures, much less drive up to meet with the head of a major crime family, one of the most powerful mob bosses in the country. And if the NFL ever saw that, he would have been banned.
Yeah.
Thankfully for him, they didn't. And thankfully for him, the FBI never referred this over to the NFL, but it was right there in black and white. I was shocked when I saw it.
you talk about, and it was a who's who. It was a who's who of characters all the way up to a former president.
Yeah.
And you had said to me, Billy DeLege, he took it casually. This was my life. It was nothing big, not a big deal for me.
Yeah. But, you know, there were a lot of moments where I would just be, you know, it's tough to get me to say, wow.
Yeah.
But that happened a lot. Especially with Trump, because with Trump, he had a number of different dealings with him. I mentioned the Michael Jackson thing earlier, but him and when Billy's now, Russell's dead, and this is mid-1990s, and Billy's meeting with Trump in Atlantic City, and they're talking about doing deals together, just the two of them.
Yeah.
And you can see how Trump operates. You know, he's doing it. He doesn't want his lawyers involved. He wants cash given to him, and he wants a lot of it. Yeah. And he's trying to get thousands of copies of his book, The Art of the Deal. He's trying to get Billy to buy thousands of copies. Yeah. And Billy says no each time because he knows he's getting rooked. But you can see, you know, you can apply how Trump acted then to his presidency. Yeah. In that he was kind of, you know, he liked to do things on his own and make, you know, these decisions without necessarily conferring with Congress. And so on a much, much smaller scale, you see that with Billy. Yeah. But the fact that he's meeting with the head, this is the first time I've ever seen, and I know a bit about Trump and his, you know, organized crime and his dealings going back to the 70s.
The concrete guys, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, he kind of had to. But this was the first time I ever seen him in a room talking deals with the head of a crime family. And that was with Billy. Yeah. And that, you know, that I had never seen before. So to me, that was, yeah, that was a wow. That was one of those wow things.
Yeah. Michael Jackson. You know, I know Billy Dilly a little bit. You know him well. I mean, you would think that would be the odd couple of all odd couples.
They liked each other. According to Bill, they once Bill was publicly identified as a security consultant. There's a picture of the book of Bill and Michael and the manager, Frank DeLeo, who was Michael's manager. And it was Frank DeLeo who had these issues with these other mob guys that wanted Jackson's contract because Trump reached out to them. And, you know, Bill was acting on behalf of DeLeo. But you see Bill touring, not just touring with Jackson, but they're confiding to each other. Or actually, Jackson's confiding to Bill about problems with his father. You know, his father was taking millions from him. And Michael would just give it to him. Like whenever he got jammed up with something, the father, and Bill was trying to counsel him and say, just say no. Or better yet, I'll say no for you. And, you know, Michael wouldn't do that. But Bill was steadfast in his argument that Michael had no interest in small children in terms of what people had accused him of.
Yeah, that was a point in the book that I was fascinated with.
He said he was a kid himself. He said he never had a childhood. He liked being with kids. He went out to Neverland, Bill did, spent time with him there. He saw him. And Bill, the one thing I will say about him too is that I think he has a good grasp of describing or understanding what a person is and what they're about.
Yeah.
And I think he got to know Michael well enough to where he can make an informed opinion on it. And that's his take. He says he didn't for 1 second believe it.
Yeah.
That he had ever abused any kids.
You've got a little bit in there about Sinatra and involvement there. Fascinating.
It was a great scene though, where and it just shows you the power of Russell in the early 70s, where they go to this restaurant that's run by Sinatra's bodyguard, Jilly Rizzo.
Jilly Rizzo, yeah. Jilly's was that was it. That was
and
the
they walk in and they take a table in the back, and Jilly comes over and says, "Hey, this is Frank's table, and Frank's in town." And I can't repeat what Russell says, but basically he says to him, the cleaned up version is, "This is my table, and if he wants to sit with me, he can sit with me. You could tell him to go take a hike." And that's the clean version. And of course, Sinatra does come in, and what does he do? He sits with Russell and Bill. And, you know, Bill was just, you know, he was just floored. He's actually talking with Sinatra.
Yeah.
He said that Sinatra and Russell talk like old friends, like they know each other for years. And there's a photo in the book from a couple of years later from a movie set where Sinatra was doing a TV movie of Russell and a member of the Colombo family, Andy Russo, who was good friends with Russell.
Yeah.
And they were together during the filming of The Godfather, and Sinatra. And so it's a pretty cool photo.
There's a neat backstory about The Godfather, and they've given credit to different, but I've seen credit given to Russell Buffalino almost as a consultant on the film,
Yeah.
and avoiding issues that may have arisen in making the movie, because some people didn't want to see it made.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So that's true. So they didn't want it made. They thought it was going to be another in a long line of movies about Italians that involve murder and more murders and then even more murders.
Yeah.
And then, so they protested, and Russell, of course, was hugely influential with the Teamsters Union. He was very close with Hoffa. His nephew, Bill Buffalino, was the Teamsters General Counsel. It was Russell who placed them there in the 1940s. And so Russell had immense power with the Teamsters. And so there would be strikes. There would be all kinds of things going on with the Teamsters guys. Some of it was rough. And then when they finally came to an agreement, it was Joe Colombo who basically led it. But according to Bill, it was Russell pulling the strings behind the scenes. And then once the movie got going, there's this great scene in the book. They're in Pennsylvania. They're here at one of Russell's clothing factories, and there's a phone call, and Billy picks it up. And the voice on the other end says, it's Marlon Brando calling for Russell Buffalino. And Billy doesn't believe it. And he turns to Russ. He goes, there's some guy on the phone says he's Marlon Brando. And Russell says, give me that phone. And it was Marlon Brando. Brando reached out to Buffalino for help in terms of portraying Don Corleone. He needed an influence. He needed someone who was a boss. And the folks that were in the know and on the set, because there were a lot of different mob guys that were around, both from the Buffalino family and the Colombo family. James Caan was good friends with Andy Russo, who I'd mentioned earlier. And they all directed him to Russell. And Russell agreed to meet with him. And he spent some time with Marlon Brando, to the point where people who see the movie and who know Russell say that Brando's take is Russell.
Yeah.
And the really interesting thing about that whole story, though, is that Russell never saw the movie. He refused to see The Godfather.
That's
After
classic.
everything he did, all of his involvement in that movie, the producer even offered him his own showing of the film already. And Russell said no. He'd never see it.
Right, amazing.
So, and
let's go to the Al Martino part of that, because he was good friends with Russell.
Yeah.
Al Martino plays the supposed Sinatra guy, and maybe you could sort of fill that all in for us. And The Godfather, again, modeled after Russell Buffalino, gets him the part, Sinatra the part. But Al Martino plays the part, which I don't think Sinatra was very happy
Sinatra
about.
hated the book. So when the book came out in, I think it was 1968, it was a wildly popular book. It sold like 10 million copies. He hated the book. He hated Mario Puzo. They almost got into it in a restaurant in Los Angeles. And he did not want this movie to be made. But Al Martino desperately wanted the role of Johnny Fontaine. Him and Russell went way back. There had always been talk about them being related, or that he was his godfather. And what Bill says, that wasn't necessarily true. They were very close.
Yeah.
It was Russell who actually, Al Martino got banned. He got shipped out of the country because he apparently had an affair with the head of a family in New York, his wife. And he left the country. He thought he was going to get killed. So he went to England. And after several years, it was Russell that brought him back. And so he wanted the part. Francis Ford Coppola didn't want to give it to him. Ultimately, Russell weighed in, and he got the part. And his
life,
Yeah.
art imitates life.
yes, and he. I don't know about any. I don't think Russell left him head of a horse in the bed, or did anything like that. But he did get the part, and there's a photo in the book of Russell and Martino at Russell's home, having a couple
At
of
the bar.
drinks. Yeah, at the bar with their wives. Russell's home, he did his business and his entertaining in a downstairs area where he had a bar and he had these seats. And today it is the same as it was in 1970.
Essentially untouched, right?
Untouched. Yeah, it's like a museum down there. And so there's a photo in the book, and they were very close.
Yeah.
Russell and Martino.
When you talk about Russell Buffalino and Billy D'Elia is growing, and they see him around, and he's a big, strong guy, and he's a big presence in any meeting. When does Billy D'Elia really come to the fore as part of the organization? And then, you talked a little bit about the shuffle of who's going to be next, particularly when Buffalino goes to prison. Tell us a little bit about that.
It was when Billy got the box. There's a story in the book about the box. The box was a safe, sort of a safe, where Russell kept his most important valuables: jewelry, papers, money. He apparently had 3 different safes, but this was the most important one. And whoever had the box ran the family.
Yeah.
And it was 1978 or so. Russell had just gotten convicted of attempting to kill this fellow Jack Napoli, which, as Billy describes in the book, it appears to be a setup on the part of the FBI because they couldn't get Russell or anybody else.
I've never heard that version before, but it sounds very credible.
They couldn't get Russell or anybody else on Hoffa, despite all the resources the FBI had given to the investigation. They just couldn't charge anybody. So what they ended up doing was they would go get different people that they had believed was involved, and they would hit them with other charges. So in this case, Russell got, according to Bill, it was a setup. So Russell's about to go to prison for a couple of years, and Billy's been with him for about 12 years now, from 66 to 78, and they have the meeting downstairs in this fantastic basement area I just mentioned. And he says, Bill's going to be in charge. Bill's going to be my liaison. I'll be in prison. Bill's going to come see me 3 times a week. Russell was going to Danbury, Connecticut to serve his time, which was only a couple hours from Scranton area, northeast Pennsylvania. And when the other guys learned in the Buffalino crew that it was Billy, that basically set off some discord within the family, some petty jealousies, which is in the book. You'll see.
But it stayed petty.
It stayed petty because no one would question Russell.
Yeah.
They tried little things to basically kind of make Bill look bad, or as if he was stealing or doing this. Russell had ultimate trust in Bill D'Elia. Russell and his wife never had children. And Bill became, within a year, Russell was calling Bill his boy. And then after that, he was calling him his son.
Yeah.
And they had complete and utter trust in each other. And Russell knew that Billy would never do anything, ever, to betray that trust.
There was a lot of private businesses. That was an issue that I've been thinking about. Russell Buffalino had a lot of private business interests, particularly in the needle trades, sewing, and so forth. Real estate, I'm sure, restaurants. It seems to have all gone away after, maybe during Russell's time in prison, but it just left. It went away, all of those.
Russell supposedly had an interest in medical industries going way back when, to the 1940s, which was this major arms maker here in Northeast Pennsylvania, which just a couple of years ago was sold to General Dynamics for something like $600 million. And it was the Medico brothers who the FBI said that they were capos in the Buffalino family.
Generation before.
Yeah, actually, I think it was 2.
Yeah, 2 generations ago.
I think it was 2 generations. And so his underboss, Dave Ostico, worked at Medico. I write the history of the Medicos and the Buffalinos is in the book.
Yeah, it's really
that's
well
one
done.
thing. We did a lot of research and found a number of different.
And that's the intersection with the Quiet Don.
Yeah,
A great intersection.
I tried to keep it separate from the Quiet Dawn. I had to do the whole Buffalino story, although I did it differently in this one. Plus, we found new information, on Russell being deported. Russell claimed he had been born here, but the government had evidence that he wasn't, and that evidence I didn't have in the first book, but I do have in this book. He apparently came here when he was only a couple of months old, Russell. So, but he was very, very close to the Medico brothers, and had a huge, and was supposedly a part owner of Medico Industries.
Where did those businesses go? Like
Medico, as I said, Medico was sold for hundreds of millions of dollars. Well, that's a good question.
Family, that was the issue, because particularly factories, a bunch of things.
Nothing's written down. It's not in Russell's name.
So it just went away.
Sort of.
That's fascinating.
The Medico,
it's a lot of money, particularly, Russell Buffalino's business interests were diverse, were substantial.
That was a big question, particularly with the Medicos and their business and their relationship with Russell and Russell's interest in Medico Industries. When Russell went to prison and subsequently died, that all went away.
Yeah.
As did his interests in other businesses. As a matter of fact, I just got an email from a woman who said that her grandfather owned the Vesuvio restaurant in New York.
Which was supposedly Russell.
Russell had been at the Vesuvio for years.
Yeah, that was his joint.
That was his place.
Yeah.
He had the keys. People come see him. People who would perform at the Copacabana would come see Russell at the Vesuvio before they would perform. There's a scene in the book with Liberace, right, that Billy was at.
Funny scene.
And so, Bill said it was Russell's. Russell had the interest. But obviously it's behind the scenes. It's not on paper.
You have it while you're alive.
It's not on paper. So with Russell's death, everything else sort of just faded away. And but by that time, Billy had really become a power himself and had developed his own businesses and his own line of work, which was basically what he was taught by Russell. I had the
fixer, negotiator.
Yeah, but the dumbest question I asked Bill was very early. It was like a couple of weeks into it. I just said to him, I said, so I'm trying to think, because Bill wasn't born into this. He was a student.
Yeah.
He was in the Army Reserves. He was going to business school up in Northeast Pennsylvania. And so I'm like, well, how'd you make money? He worked in an appliance store.
Yeah.
And I said, well, how'd you make money with Russell? I said, did he pay you every week? Did he write you, He goes, no, he didn't pay me. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. He's not going to write him a check. He didn't pay me. He taught me.
Yeah.
And basically taught me how to do things. And that's exactly what Bill ended up doing. And Bill, when Russell went to prison, he had already been representing Russell across the country in different matters. And then Bill became the guy, the power. That's why he got called into the whole Donald Trump mess with Michael Jackson. Bill was the guy because Frank DeLeo, the manager, had known, he's from Pittsburgh. Frank DeLeo was in Goodfellas. People would know him as the cab stand owner, Tootie, the little squat guy, Tootie Cicero.
That was a funny part when I just pictured Tootie from Goodfellas. You just put it so well, and I'm picturing Tootie running back and forth delivering messages in Goodfellas.
Yeah. So he knew people in Pittsburgh, and he kind of was like, he let people know that he was sort of mobbed up, but wasn't. But he didn't know people. But the people in Pittsburgh weren't big enough to deal with the mob guys from LA that Trump had enlisted. Billy was. So they called Billy, and at the scene in the hotel in New York during the Grammys in 1988, where these two guys show up, they don't know Billy's going to be there.
Yeah.
But as soon as they see Billy there, that's it. It's up. They know that this isn't happening. Billy kicks them out. They go away. But then Bill turns around to Frank DeLeo, who's ecstatic. He's thrilled that this isn't happening. But then Bill says to him, this isn't over yet. I'm now your partner.
Yeah.
And he was his partner. So that's basically, that's what Bill was doing. So he was developing his own businesses. Whatever Russell was involved with sort of kind of went away, including the whole Medico thing. The Medico thing did come up in our conversations because there was a question, because given how much money the business was sold for subsequently, But they were
Again, 2 generations later.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's just it. It's 2 generations later. They are so removed from the whole Buffalino thing. They have nothing to do with it. You know, they built the business up there themselves to the point where they could sell it for that kind of money. So, but when you see that kind of money, that question comes up.
And when General Dynamics buys it, they've checked it out.
Yes, exactly.
So let's go back to mob protocol. It doesn't seem like there was the burning of the saints and the pricking of the finger or any of the maid issues that you see in the mafia movies and that you've read about and heard about. Was that because Russell was above the commission? He could do it his way?
That was because of Russell.
Yeah.
And only because of Russell. He was probably the only guy that could do that. Where, you know, Bill, what you made, it was a hard thing for him to admit. Bill spent 6 years in prison, 2 waiting for his case to be resolved, and then another 4 in federal prison. And he does not want to go back. So this is one of the things early on that he just didn't really want to feel comfortable talking about. Ultimately, he did. But it's like the story is just, it's incredible in that they used to have these Italian-American nights once a year that Buffalino ran.
I remember them well.
And it drew everyone, like all the big mucky mucks in the region would go.
Yeah.
And they had one, and a few days later, Billy's called to the Howard Johnsons. I think it was somewhere near Wilkes-Barre that Russell actually.
I worked next door to it.
So that was another business. Well, people didn't know it. He owned it.
That.
There you go. He didn't have his name on it, but he
Duke's
owned it.
Corner, and his boxing guy was Louis Del Vecchio.
Yeah, he ran it. For him. But Billy goes in, and there's a room in the back, a big room, and there's like 40, 50 of the biggest mob guys from across the country that are there. And Bill has no idea what's going on. And he had been with Russell 4 or 5, about 6 years now. And they call Bill over, and Russell puts his hand on his shoulder, reaches up and puts his hand on his shoulder, and says, "You all know Bill as my son, but now he's one of us." And that was it. There was no burning of the saints. There was no pricking the finger for blood.
Yeah.
It was just Russell said it, and it was done because Billy was half Irish.
Yeah,
his mother was Irish, and you could not be made, supposedly, with that kind of bloodline.
Yeah.
But Russell was Russell, and if Russell wanted it, so be it. And Billy was, from then on, a made member of the Buffalino family.
What did you take away? Because you've had broad experience with people, with the mob story overall through this, through your previous work in this book. What sort of takeaway do you have, a general, or do you have?
No, I do actually.
Yeah.
And that is, so, I'm the son of a cop, New York City cop, right? So things were pretty black and white.
Yeah.
There was right and there was wrong. Then I become a journalist. And over the course of my career, I see there's some gray area. Okay. In talking to Billy, I never realized that the gray area wasn't this, it was this.
Most of the playing field.
Yes. There's a little black and there's a little white and there's a huge swath of gray. And, Bill wasn't just involved with people within organized crime. He was involved in negotiating and solving problems for people in the sports world, in the entertainment world, in the business world, in politics. It was amazing. Like we just talked about some of these really huge names. I mean, think about Russell's going to prison in 1981 and they need a Hail Mary and they enlist Muhammad Ali and his trainer, Angelo Dundee, to go to Washington to plead with Senator Ted Kennedy to help with a pardon or a reduction in the sentence, which was a really good idea. Only, unfortunately, the Kennedys hated Buffalino. Going back to the 1950s, and it's in the book, with Russell's battles with Bobby Kennedy, and then subsequently the Kennedys believing that the mob was involved in the deaths of John Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy. Russell and Bobby Kennedy hated each other. And Ted Kennedy knew it, and Ted Kennedy throws them out. But just think of, this isn't something that you're going to read in the paper. They got to see him. on behalf of Buffalino.
Yeah.
So there's this whole world that really exists that's under the table, so to speak, in which business is conducted.
Yeah.
And some of the biggest business in the country, if not the world. And that's what really opened my eyes in terms of this book and Bill and people like Bill. Actually, there weren't that many people that were like Bill.
Yeah.
But people that populate it and have that kind of power and influence. Russell had it. Bill had it. But to see that there are these people that you can go to help solve problems. And it's not just crime problems, mafia problems. It's everything else.
Yeah.
It's just, to me, that was just remarkable.
So your takeaway on Billy D'Elia? Charming?
Yeah.
Smart?
Absolutely.
What else? How would you describe Billy D'Elia? He's the subject of the book. We've described Russell Buffalino to some extent. Tell us about it.
So again, Bill is who he is. He was a gangster. He makes no apologies. He takes full ownership of his life.
Yeah.
No regrets. I know who he is. He spent 6 years in prison. All of that said, you sit down with the man and you get to know him and you talk to him and you like him.
Yeah.
He's charming. He's charming. He's easy to talk to. He's very smart. He's very, very smart. I don't get me wrong. I'm a journalist, so I have to be objective.
Yeah.
And I'm going in there and I'm interviewing him and I'm talking to him. And I always maintain that objectivity, even to this day.
Yeah.
But he, the Bill D'Elia that I just spent 3 years with is someone that you could sit down and hang out and have a cup of coffee with and talk. And
Did you ever run into the steel behind the charm?
Yeah, a couple of times.
What set that off? If you recall.
That's a good question, because there were a couple of times where, okay, that's Bill. Yeah. Because it's there.
Here's why he got these.
Here's why he was
Yeah.
very good at what he did. Yes, you could see why he was so powerful. It came in little moments where, let's say he would get a phone call during our interviews, and there was someone on the phone, and I had no idea what they were talking about, but you could see that Bill pop out.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a couple of instances when talking about the book. Don't get me, it wasn't all, ice cream and whatnot. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't like that. I mean, Bill's Bill. But I do, you have to kind of remove yourself and look at his life and look at what he made his choice to go with Russell. He loved Russell.
Yeah.
And some of the reasons are, you read about his relationship with his own father. And there's a scene early on in the book, which, disturbs a lot of people, animal lovers, particularly. I knew, once I heard that story, I knew it had to be up early, it had to be up front. But, you know his life, you know who he is, you know what he's done, but you spend a lot of time with someone and you talk to them and you can't help but, say to yourself.
Without mentioning that, would you think that was a formative story for Bill?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. Yeah, to see something like that happen when you're only 4 years old. I don't want to say it.
Yeah, I think I'd like
people.
to read
I want
it.
people to read the book.
Yeah.
To see that. But, it's a major event in his life involving his father. And then subsequently, there were other events that added to it. He does not, and I do not use it in the book as an excuse for him choosing the life that he chose. He chose it willingly.
Yeah.
Would I have done that? No. But he did it. And it really was all about Russell. And then you begin to see, they have their own reasons for doing things. They have their own reasons for being in that line of work, and they justify it to themselves. And then the government has its own take on what they're doing. Bill said to me that Russell was not involved in drugs. As we talked about that.
And you've researched it.
Yeah, I did.
You saw nothing.
I didn't find anything. Yeah, I didn't find anything about drugs. I did find, though, that Russell was and could be as charming as there are scenes in the book, particularly with Billy's family and Billy's kids, where as charming as Russell could be, he could also be equally violent.
Yeah.
And the government described him as being that early on in like early 1960s, following a congressional committee report. Oh, in the report, it says he's one of the most powerful and violent members of organized crime. And he was. And that's what he used people like Frank Sheeran for muscle, to dispatch people. Yeah. So, I mean, make no mistake, this is who these guys were. Okay. But when you're sitting with someone for 3 years and you're talking to them and you can't help but, form a bit of a relationship with them.
This is an oddball question, but I think an important one in a way. Was the diminishment and the diminished mob a good thing for this country, this region, or a bad thing? I mean, I see some of the bad.
Yeah. People would think of the mob as being guys that they could somewhat turn to in times of trouble. At the same time, there were also parts of the mob, obviously, that you don't want to go near. Look, the Buffalinos, according to Bill, were involved in drugs. There are other crime families that were very involved in drugs, heroin, methamphetamine, which is just not, that's just not good for society, period. So this book and Bill's life it was less about the violence of that life and more about the business of that life and how it interlocked with other parts of society and how other people that you would think would be so-called legitimate business professionals, attorneys, real estate barons, music industry, came to rely on them to settle problems. Who else are you going to go to? I mean, the government's not going to do it. What are you going to do? Like Bill would say, one of Bill's great lines was, what are you going to do? Go to file a lawsuit? I mean, you got these two mob guys shaking down that Donald Trump gets to shake down Michael Jackson. What are they going to do? They're going to sue the mob guys or Trump? No. So who do you go to? You go to guys like Bill or the few guys that were like Bill. So, I can't, it's a part of life. Yeah. I mean, it's always been, organized crime has always been a part of human existence. There's always, that's why they call it the underworld.
Yeah. The Life We Chose, this book, it tells the history of our area in a lot of ways. Do you think it has broader meaning?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's, we just talked about it, the business. This is really,
I love that gray area.
Yeah. I mean, it's not just local. I mean, every book, every story has a local angle. I mean, that's what it's about. I just saw the movie Moneyball. Yeah. I haven't read the book, but I saw the movie. It was about a baseball team in Oakland, the Oakland A's. So it was local to Oakland, but it had national implications given Major League Baseball is a national sport, right? This story is obviously local to this area because everyone either knows or have heard whispers. And if you don't know it, you heard it from your father or you heard it from your grandfather or even great-grandfather, because that's how far it goes back. Yeah. But it's really a book with national and broad implications, given the people that are involved and given the places and Bill and Russell had been to. I mean, you're talking about hearings in Washington, D.C. You're talking about Russell owning casinos in Cuba, for instance. You're talking about Bill going to Los Angeles. Bill spent a lot of time in the 80s in Los Angeles and 90s. He basically, I think it was the Beverly Hilton. I mean, he had his own suite there that he stayed in. And he would be there and he'd be just, he'd be the guy that they would call on. So it's a book with national implications. Yeah. It's a national story, but obviously it's got a local flavor.
Did you find him content with the life he chose? Happy might be too strong of a word, but did you find him fully content with the life he chose and how it went?
I think his contentment comes more from his relationship with Russell. I think that's how much Russell opened the world to him. Again, it was organized crime. But still, think about it. If he had graduated with a business degree and became an accountant. Let's say he became an accountant at his appliance store that he worked for, and stayed here and got married and had a good life. And then think about, and I'm not saying he would, maybe, he would have chose the other one. The one where you're meeting Johnny Unitas and Jimmy Hoffa and, Donald Trump and Michael Jackson and, countless other people that we didn't even mention. Yeah. And his relationship that he had with Russell. Just to be, I think, that becomes...
He was the father he never had.
Yeah, but it also becomes, it's like a drug. You're with a guy like that who's just so powerful and who people bow to, meaning Russell, and you're with him. And they're affording you similar respect. I mean, that's something that's really hard to turn off.
Yeah.
Or to pull yourself away from. And, his ability to travel across the country and to be... there's a line in Goodfellas. I don't remember it exactly, but it was basically, they can go anywhere at any time and do anything. Yeah. And that was basically Bill. Yeah. And so I think, he chose it. He's content with the life. He has no regrets. Yeah. And it was the one thing I found out was really honest about him in that, he didn't go, maybe I could have done this, I could have done that. He has zero regrets. He was, for the life that he chose. I don't think he's too thrilled that he had to go to prison. Yeah. It took a long time for him to even be charged with a crime. But he didn't have any regrets. And, when he read the book, we really didn't have much to talk about. Like, there wasn't a lot where you have to take this out or take that out, if you can, or, there were a couple of things that he wasn't really sure about, like being made. He wasn't sure if that would get him in trouble. Yeah. And I just, look, Bill, it's a really important scene. Yeah. It's a scene that really, we need to keep in the book.
All right. So, Matt, good, bad, or is it Billy D'Elia? Is it that big gray area?
Oh, big gray area. Oh, Bill?
Yeah, Bill himself. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. In terms of what? In terms of
what type of man? In the end, you're.
I was blown away a couple of weeks ago at Barnes & Noble over in Wilkes-Barre. We did a book signing. I walked in, it was from 5 to 8. I got there at 4:30. I think Bill got there 5 minutes later. There's already a line we were signing books in the back of the store. There was already a line to the front of the store. And this is a huge Barnes & Noble. We started signing books 5 minutes later, like around 22, 4:45 before it was supposed to begin. And then the line got even bigger once we started. And by the end, we kept signing for 3 hours. And by the end of the night, we signed over 1,000 books, which is virtually unheard of. You need to be a major international celebrity where here in this area, Bill is the guy. Yeah. That to me, and these are people that want to say hello to him, want to shake hands with him. And a lot of women, whose either husbands or sons or fathers had known him or had known him from a place called the Woodlands that he used to frequent or whatever. They just wanted to see him and say hello. And, or Bill, you did this for me back then, or you did this for me or whatever. It was incredible. Think about it. The former head of a major crime family doing a book signing was pretty... It was pretty unusual.
Joe Bonanno was the last one to do that.
But then to have over 1,000 people show up or to sign over 1,000 books, I think that in itself would answer your question.
Yeah. Well, Matt Birkbeck, thank you very much for sitting with us and telling us all about this great book. I say that with no reservation. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Okay.
Thanks for being part of the program. You've got an appointment every Sunday morning at 11:30 right here on WNEP TV, The Bob Cordaro Show on TV.
On TV.
The Bob...